I thought I was invincible once. I carried the weight of expectations, dreams, and the constant need to prove myself. Not just to the people around me, but to myself. I grew up believing that strength meant pushing through, that resilience meant never breaking, never bending, no matter what life threw at me. So, I kept moving forward. I took on everything I could and then some. I became the person who was always there for everyone else, the one who had it all together. I was the friend who listened, the partner who supported, the worker who delivered results every single time. But somewhere along the way, I started to crack. I ignored the signs, the fatigue, the anxiety, the nagging self-doubt that crept in during the quiet moments when I was alone. It was like standing on a fault line, feeling the tremors under my feet, but convincing myself that the ground wouldn't give way. I convinced myself that if I just pushed a little harder, if I just held on a little longer, everything would be okay. I buried my emotions deep, thinking they were distractions I couldn't afford. I told myself that the heavy feeling in my chest was temporary, just a passing phase. I'm just tired, I'd say. I'll be fine after a good night's sleep. But the exhaustion wasn't just physical. It seeped into my mind, into my soul. It was the kind of exhaustion that no amount of rest could fix, because it wasn't my body that was tired. It was my spirit. The day I couldn't get out of bed was the moment I realized something was seriously wrong. It wasn't just a matter of being tired anymore. It felt like my entire being was weighed down by an invisible force. I tried to sit up, to move, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if all the strength I'd prided myself on had vanished overnight. I felt defeated, powerless. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. I hadn't cried in years. I didn't know how to. I thought crying was a sign of weakness, something I'd trained myself to avoid at all costs. But in that moment, the tears came, and I let them. I felt shattered, like everything I built was falling apart in front of me. The life I had carefully constructed, the image of the person I thought I was, crumbled. I felt a deep sense of failure, as if I had let myself and everyone else down. I couldn't understand it. I had done everything right, hadn't I? I had worked hard, sacrificed, put on a brave face. Yet here I was, unable to even lift myself off the bed. It felt like the end of something, like a final collapse after years of holding up a structure that was never stable in the first place. For the first time in my life, I admitted to myself that I wasn't okay. It was terrifying. I had built my entire identity on being strong, on being the person who didn't break. But here I was, broken, or at least that's how it felt. I lost my sense of direction, my confidence, and my voice. I didn't know who I was anymore if I wasn't this strong, invincible version of myself. It was as if I had been stripped of my armor, left vulnerable and exposed. I questioned everything I had ever believed about strength, about resilience, about what it meant to be okay. I had hit my breaking point, and I didn't know where to go from there. I spent years hiding behind a mask. It was easier that way. It was easier to pretend I was fine, to put on a smile, to laugh at the right moments, even when inside I was screaming. I got so good at it that I almost fooled myself. I became an expert in the art of appearing okay. I told people what they wanted to hear. I'm good. Everything's fine. I've got it under control. It was a script I'd rehearsed so many times it became second nature. I didn't want anyone to see the cracks beneath the surface. I didn't want anyone to know how much I was struggling, so I built walls around myself and hid behind them, thinking it was safer that way. But there were moments, rare moments, when I would look at myself in the mirror and feel like a stranger was staring back at me. I didn't recognize the person I saw. The eyes looking back were empty, hollow. Like all the life had been drained out of them. It scared me. I could feel the weight of everything I was hiding, pressing down on me like a physical burden. I realized then that I wasn't broken, but I was bent, twisted out of shape by the pain I had never allowed myself to feel. I was still standing, still functioning, but I wasn't whole. I was contorted by the years of pretending, of suppressing everything that made me feel weak. I started to understand that maybe I wasn't as strong as I thought I was. But maybe that was okay. Maybe being bent wasn't the same as being broken. I was still here, wasn't I? I hadn't given up, even though I wanted to, even though there were days when the thought of giving up seemed like the only way out. But something inside me kept going, kept pushing through the fog of depression, the haze of anxiety. I realized then that strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes, strength looks like bending without breaking. It's the flexibility to survive the storm, to bend in the wind without snapping. I let myself lean into the bend. I stopped resisting it. I started to allow myself to feel everything I'd buried for so long. The sadness, the grief, the anger. They all came rushing to the surface. And I let them. I let the tears flow when they needed to. I let myself scream into a pillow when the anger became too much. It was messy, chaotic, and painful, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, I felt something real. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. It was the only way I could begin to understand the shape I had taken. The bent, imperfect shape of a person who had been through a lot but was still here. I realized that my bends were proof of my resilience. They were the marks of someone who had faced hardship and adapted, who had been tested and found a way to survive. I wasn't broken, just bent. And that bend was part of my story, part of who I was becoming. I stopped trying to fix myself because I realized there was nothing wrong with me. I was just different now. Bent things aren't fragile. They're resilient. They have a strength all their own, born from the flexibility to endure. This was my new truth. I was not the person I used to be, but I wasn't broken either. I was reshaped by my experiences, and I was learning to embrace that new shape. The bends were my story, the story of someone who had faced storms and survived them, of someone who had bent but never snapped. And maybe, just maybe, that was a kind of strength I could be proud of. Healing wasn't a straight line. I used to think that once I decided to face my pain, everything would fall into place, that it would be like flipping a switch. I imagined it like climbing a mountain once. You reach the top. The hard part is over. But I quickly learned that healing isn't a peak you reach. It's more like a winding road with unexpected detours and dead ends. It's messy. It's unpredictable. There were moments when I felt like I was making progress. Like I could finally breathe without feeling the weight of my past pressing down on my chest. But just as often, I found myself right back where I started, falling into old patterns, reliving the same pain I thought I had moved past. At first, It was frustrating. I thought I was doing everything right. I was opening up, allowing myself to feel, acknowledging my struggles instead of running from them. But even then, I had setbacks. There were days when it felt like all the work I'd done was for nothing. I would wake up feeling numb, disconnected from the world and from myself, like I was drifting in a fog. I'd fall back into the habits I was trying so hard to break, numbing myself with distractions, shutting people out, retreating into my own mind where it felt safer. It was as if my heart and mind were two separate entities, constantly at war with each other. My heart wanted to heal, to let go, but my mind was stuck in a loop, replaying the moments that had bent me in the first place. I realized then that healing isn't about perfection. It's not about waking up one day and being completely okay. It's about the tiny, almost imperceptible shifts that happen over time. It's about the moments when I chose to breathe through the anxiety instead of letting it consume me. The times when I reached out to a friend instead of isolating myself. The days when I got out of bed even when every part of me wanted to stay hidden under the covers. Those small victories mattered. They were the quiet signs that something inside me was changing, even if I couldn't always see it. One of the hardest parts was learning to forgive myself. I held on to so much guilt and regret. Regret for the things I'd said when I was hurting, for the people I'd pushed away, for the moments I wasn't my best self. I replayed those memories over and over, punishing myself for not being stronger, for not handling things better. I had a hard time accepting that I had made mistakes, that I had let myself and others down. It was easier to believe I was flawed beyond repair, that my bends were evidence of something fundamentally wrong with me. But slowly, I started to realize that part of healing was learning to show myself the same compassion I'd shown others. I'd always been quick to forgive the people I loved, to understand their mistakes and offer them grace. Yet, I couldn't do the same for myself. It took time, but I began to see that I deserved that same kindness. I began to understand that I had done the best I could with the tools I had at the time. I was learning, I was growing. I wasn't perfect, and I never would be. But that was okay. I was human, and part of being human is making mistakes, falling down, and finding the strength to get back up again. I started to rebuild my life, but this time it was different. I wasn't building it on a foundation of perfection or unrealistic expectations. I was building it on a foundation of honesty, of vulnerability. I let myself admit when I was struggling. I reached out for help when I needed it, something I had always been too proud to do before. I realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength. It meant I was willing to face my pain, to confront the parts of myself I had been avoiding for so long. I learned to listen to my body, to the signals it was giving me. I had spent years ignoring the warning signs, the tightness in my chest, the racing thoughts, the way my hands would tremble when I was overwhelmed. I had pushed through the pain, convincing myself it was normal, that it was just part of life. But now I was learning to pause, to check in with myself, to ask, what do I need right now? What am I feeling? It was a small shift, but it made a world of difference. It allowed me to tune into the parts of myself I had silenced for so long. Healing became less about fixing myself and more about embracing the person I was becoming. I realized that I wasn't trying to go back to who I used to be. That person didn't exist anymore. I was becoming someone new, someone shaped by the things I had been through. I started to appreciate the bends in my character, the ways they had made me softer, more empathetic. I found strength in my vulnerability, in the rawness of my emotions. It was like seeing the world in color for the first time after living in black and white. There were still hard days, of course. There were still moments when I felt like I was right back at square one, when the weight of my past felt too heavy to carry. But those moments didn't define me anymore. They were just part of the process, part of the messy, non-linear journey of healing. I learned to accept them, to let them pass without judging myself for having them. I stopped looking at healing as something with a clear start and finish. Instead, I began to see it as a continuous journey, an ongoing practice of self-compassion and growth. I found peace in the small, ordinary moments, the feeling of the sun on my face during a morning walk, the sound of rain tapping against the window, the warmth of a friend's embrace. These moments, fleeting as they were, became my anchors. They reminded me that there was beauty in the world, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. They reminded me that I was capable of feeling joy, that there was more to life than just surviving. As I continued on my healing journey, I realized something profound. I wasn't trying to fix myself anymore, because I finally understood there was nothing to fix. I wasn't broken. I was bent, shaped by the storms I had weathered, but I was still whole. I was still me. And that realization was the most healing thing of all. It allowed me to let go of the shame, the guilt, the need to be perfect. It allowed me to accept myself fully, with all my flaws and imperfections. It was a kind of freedom I had never experienced before. I started to trust myself again, to believe that I was capable of handling whatever life threw my way. I knew I would have hard days, but I also knew I had the tools to get through them. I had proven to myself time and time again that I was stronger than I realized. I wasn't afraid of the bends anymore. I knew they were part of my story, part of what made me resilient. They were a testament to the fact that I had survived, that I had faced the darkest parts of myself and come out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger and more compassionate than before. And that was enough. I was enough, just as I was, bent but unbroken, perfectly imperfect. I no longer see myself as broken. I used to believe that my worth depended on my ability to be perfect, to be whole, without any cracks or flaws. But now, I've learned to see myself differently. I am bent, not broken, and there is a quiet power in that realization. My bends tell a story of struggle, of survival, of learning to adapt when life didn't go as planned. I've come to understand that these bends aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of resilience, of a kind of strength that comes from being tested and shaped by the storms I've weathered. I used to hide my scars, thinking they made me look weak, thinking that if people saw the parts of me that were bent out of shape, they would turn away. But I've realized that my scars are not something to be ashamed of. They're a map of the journey I've been on, the battles I've fought, and the lessons I've learned along the way. Each bend, each scar, is a reminder that I have lived, that I have loved deeply, that I have felt pain and still found a way to move forward. They tell a story of a person who didn't give up, even when giving up seemed like the easiest option. I used to think the goal was to fix myself, to straighten out the bends and become the version of myself I thought I was supposed to be. But now, I see that I don't need fixing. I don't need to go back to who I used to be, because I am not that person anymore. I am something different, something stronger, something softer and wiser. I've embraced the fact that I am still evolving, still changing, still bending. I am a work in progress, and I've come to love that about myself. I've stopped trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me in the first place. I've let go of the need to be perfect, and in doing so, I found a sense of freedom I never knew existed. It wasn't an easy journey to get here. There were days when I felt like I was taking one step forward and 2 steps back. I had to confront the parts of myself I had buried deep, the parts I was afraid to look at too closely. I had to learn to sit with my discomfort, to lean into the pain instead of running from it. I had to unlearn years of conditioning that told me I had to be strong, that showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness. But slowly, I started to understand that true strength isn't about never bending. It's about knowing when to bend, when to let go, when to give myself the grace to heal. I've started to live my life differently now. I don't chase perfection anymore. I don't measure my worth by how much I can endure without breaking. Instead, I embrace the bends, the curves that make me who I am. I've found beauty in the imperfections, in the parts of me that aren't polished or smooth. I've learned to love the person I see in the mirror, not despite the bends, but because of them. They are a testament to my growth, to the person I've become through the challenges I've faced. I've also learned to set boundaries, something I never knew how to do before. I used to bend myself to fit the needs of everyone around me, thinking that was what it meant to be a good friend, a good partner, a good person. I would stretch myself thin, trying to be everything to everyone, afraid that if I didn't, I would be left alone. But I've realized that true connection doesn't come from bending over backwards for others. It comes from showing up as my authentic self, with all my flaws and imperfections. I've learned that it's okay to say no, to protect my peace, to prioritize my own well-being. I've learned that the people who truly care about me will love me as I am, bent and all. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I am living authentically. I'm no longer trying to fit into a version of myself that was never real. I'm no longer hiding behind a mask, pretending to be okay when I'm not. I've embraced my vulnerability, and in doing so, I've found a strength I never knew I had. I've found the courage to show up as I am, without apology, without shame. It's a liberating feeling to know that I don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love and acceptance. I am enough, just as I am. I've started to see my bends as gifts, as opportunities for growth and self-discovery. They have made me more compassionate, more empathetic. I am better able to understand the pain of others, to hold space for them in a way I never could before. My own struggles have taught me to be kinder, to be gentler, to approach the world with a softness that comes from knowing what it feels like to be bent, to feel like you might break. I've found that there is a certain beauty in embracing the imperfect, in finding strength in the places where I once saw only weakness. I am no longer afraid of the bends. I know now that they are part of my story, part of what makes me who I am. They are a reminder that I am capable of withstanding the storms, that I can bend without breaking. I've stopped wishing for a life without challenges, without pain, because I see now that it's the challenges that have shaped me, that have molded me into someone I'm proud of. I'm no longer chasing after a version of myself that doesn't exist. I am embracing the person I am right now in this moment. Bent, but not broken. This is my truth. I am enough just as I am. I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to have it all figured out. I'm still growing, still learning, still bending, and that's okay. I'm a work in progress, and I've come to love the process of becoming. I've realized that life isn't about reaching a destination. It's about the journey, about the bends and twists along the way that make it all worth living. I know there will be more storms, more moments that test me, that bend me in ways I can't yet imagine. But I am no longer afraid of them. I welcome them, knowing that I have the strength to endure, that I have the resilience to bend without breaking. I am not broken. I am just bent. And that's more than enough. It's not the smooth, unmarked surface that tells the story. It's the bends, the curves, the places where I've had to adapt, to stretch, to change, and that's where my beauty lies. In the imperfections. In the bends that show I've lived, that I've loved, that I've survived. I am here standing tall not despite the bends but because of them. I am proud of the person I've become, proud of the journey I've taken, and I wouldn't change a single thing. I've learned to love myself in all my messy, imperfect glory. I am not broken. I am bent, and that bend is my strength, my power, my truth.